Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about jQuery and in specific, how in jQuery we use AJAX to do HTML includes. Basic idea of an HTML include is that we can write a piece of HTML code and store it in a file, and then bring that same piece of code into multiple web pages, kind of the same way that we do with a external CSS file or an external JavaScript file. So it's write once, use often. So let's start by talking about what is AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's a combination of JavaScript using the DOM, and browser-generated HTTP requests. So if we look to the right over here, we can see what happens. We're in the browser, an event occurs, JavaScript creates an XML HTTP request, and the browser helps with that. They send that request through the internet to the server, which processes that request. It creates a response to send the data back to the browser through the internet. The browser then gets that returned data using JavaScript and updates the page content using the DOM. All this happens behind the scenes without the page having to reload, which is a really exciting piece of that. So what AJAX is allowing us to do as a web designer is communicate with a server and get responses from that server, and then using the DOM, update or alter the current page without having to refresh or reload it. We're going to be focusing on the use of AJAX inside of jQuery. jQuery is not required to do AJAX. AJAX can be written just through JavaScript and HTTP requests, but jQuery certainly does make it easier to do AJAX. So let's break down the parts of an AJAX call. The first thing that we have here is we've got the actual AJAX function. So we start with the $, which is the shorthand for jQuery.ajax. It is a function, so it's got parentheses. And what we're sending into the parentheses is a set of curly braces with a list of properties. It's actually an object going in with a list of properties and values. So here's a couple of the properties that we'll send in. Certainly there are others, but these are the ones we're going to focus on right now. The first one is type. And for type, we can have a variety of different things. The most common are get or post, very similar to the way that we send information from a form. Right now, for the HTML includes, we're just going to use get. It makes life pretty easy. The second thing then is the URL of the file that we're pointing to. So that's the HTML file that we're going to include. If we have a relative path, we have to go in and out of folders. We need to make sure that we utilize that relative path here. Next is the data type, and we're going to specify this as HTML right now. This specifies the type of the file in the URL. So this would be file.html, which makes the data type HTML. The last two pieces then are what happens when the response comes back. Either we will have a successful AJAX query, AJAX call, which means it found the page, and then we do something with that. We write a function to do something, or we have some kind of connection error where we're unable to find the page, and we'll want to notify the user of that as well somehow. So let's take a look at it then in syntax. You'll see up here, we're starting the AJAX call, and then we end that AJAX call, the curly braces and the parentheses down here. The properties are listed on the left-hand side, followed by a semicolon, followed by a colon, and then the values of those properties are in quotes. You can use single or double here. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of your preference. One of the things that gets a lot of people is that the property values are separated by commas. You kind of get used to writing CSS where you do colons and semicolons. That is not the case here. It's always a comma after it. Notice after the full success function, we have a comma. And then since the error is the last thing, then there's no comma after it. Success and error, their value for both is a function. And we can do anything that we want in that function. So right now we're just alerting information because remember it is JavaScript. This response variable parameter is really interesting in the success function. That's what we call a callback parameter. And what's happening is that value response is the text or the HTML that's coming back from this file. So this parameter is how we're bringing back the information that we were looking for. Okay, so let's talk about what happens then. How do we use this information with the DOM? So when we have an AJAX call that's successful, then the success function operates. And again, as I said, the HTML from this file gets pushed into the response. So here's what happens. We're on caller.html. We load the page. The first thing that happens is we have our jQuery AJAX call. It goes out to the server and it finds this file, include.html. The server then returns all of the information inside include.html, all of this HTML code, and pushes it into this response variable. Then inside that response, the success function with that response variable, we can use the JavaScript DOM and jQuery. And what we do is we take this SumID location and we append into it the response. And what that's going to do is come up here into the HTML code, find the ID with location, and it's going to take all of this HTML code and push it in as the last child of that location ID element. So now that we understand how to do AJAX, now we're going to talk a little bit more about why we're going to do AJAX. So if you've designed websites before, you understand that if you make a multi-page website, the header, the navigation, the footer, some forms, different things, some links, etc., are the same on all of our pages. So the more pages we have, when there's a change to be made, the more pages we have to touch. So if we've written this 5-page site here, and we have to make a change to the navigation because we have to add a new item or a new link, now I have to go into every one of these pages. I have to touch every one of these pages individually, and I have to go in and copy and paste the new code in. Not so bad with 5, a little tougher to stomach with 20 or 30 or 50 pages in a site. So what AJAX in jQuery does for us is it lets us write this header and this nav as its own file. And then we take that and we push it in to each of those other pages, which means if there's a change to be made, we change in this file and then that makes that change everywhere. The same way that if we had an external style sheet and we change the background color of the body from blue to red, all of the pages backgrounds would change from blue to red. If I make a change to the navigation here, it changes on all the pages because all of these pages are drawing from this one file. So let's take a look at what this would look like. Let's assume that we're going to build a navigation that we're going to be able to bring into to a variety of different pages. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a nav.html file. And here's my very basic navigation. It's got a couple of links. They're all pointing to the same place right now. But so I've got my navigation set up here. And then I have a separate file called nav.js. And in nav.js, that's where I'm writing an AJAX call. And so I have a document.ready. And then I have my AJAX call, which is saying, all right, it's going to be get. We're going to go into the includes folder and find nav.html. The data type is going to be HTML. Here's what we do for an error, and here's what we do for success. For success, we're going to take that response, we're going to go to the header, and we're going to append the response on as the last child of the header tag. All right, so these are what these two files look like. Now let's take a step out of this and look at what it looks like then inside of the site file system and then how it's used. So if I've got my site folder set up and I'm going to have CSS and images and includes and script folders, and then of course my index page here and whatever other pages that I need, inside of my includes, I typically have nav.html. Inside of my scripts, I have nav.js. So includes for me are pieces of code that don't stand on their own, but are going to be included as part of a bigger file. And then scripts are just that, they're JavaScripts. And so what happens here is in my index page or any other page for that matter, I make my header, I put in my image, my site title, those kinds of things, but I don't write a navigation. Then I finish the rest of the page, sections, footer. I bring in my jQuery and Bootstrap script files, and underneath that, I include scripts/nav.js. Let me go back for a second, remembering that it's nav.js that then reaches out to bring nav in. So by including that script here, then what it's doing is that script is going to reach out and get nav.html. It's going to bring it back in. And remember, nav.html is going to push it in as the last child of this header. And that nav is going to sit right under here. We can do that in as many pages as we want. And once we have it set up this way, then at the bottom of every page, I just bring in script/nav.js, and now that nav comes into every page. If I make a change in this file, then it's changed everywhere. Here's some ideas for how to use AJAX in jQuery. You might use it for headers, for navs, for footers. At the top of the pages, you typically have the same style and bootstrap calls. At the bottom of the pages, you typically have the same script includes, so you could put those into a file. Sign-in modals, if you want a sign-in modal that appears on every page, then you could certainly make that into an include file. And that sign-in modal could have the HTML, the CSS, and some JavaScript inside of it as well. Or if you've got a contact form that's going to appear often on a page, all kinds of different things. Anything that's going to appear often on several pages, it makes sense that you would do this doing an include. One word of warning: you can get really caught up and things can get really nasty because you can have your header file set up as an include, and then your header can include a nav, and things get really nasty when you do multiple levels of include. So I strongly encourage you to just stick to the basics. And your file might be, bring in the header, bring in the nav, bring in the footer, those kinds of things, so that you don't kind of get overwhelmed. All right, so now we've got practice. Of course, as always, you can go out to the website for more info. And I will be asking you to do more practice, specifically right now in this practice sheet. You're only ready for level 1 and 2, number 4. They kind of work together. So start with level 1, number 4, and then go to level 2, number 4. But in the meantime, before you get to that, let's try this. We're going to create a web page that has 2 paragraph divs in the body. You can fill those divs with any text you want. Then create another HTML file that has an H1 in it with some text. Use jQuery AJAX to reach out to the second file and add that H1 as the first child of the body. In other words, it's going to appear above the divs of the body. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to give this a shot. And when you're ready, then start the video again, and you can see the solution. Okay, so let's take a look at the solution. Once again, we're creating a web page with 2 paragraph divs in it. So here they are: div, text, 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 div, text, text, text. I have another HTML file called heading.html, which has an H1 inside of it. And what I'm doing over here on my original page is I'm using jQuery AJAX, and I'm going to reach out to heading.html. Oh, I forgot to write the solution in here. I'm going to reach out to heading.html, and what's going to happen in this success function that I didn't write here is that it's going to say, all right, go to the body and prepend response. So it should say $body dot prepend, and then in the parentheses of the prepend, we get the response. Let me just, I'll do that right here so you can see it happen. So it's body dot prepend response. And what that will do then is that will find the body tag right up here. And prepend, remember, is adding a child at the beginning, adding a first child of the body. And so it's going to come up to the body before these divs, and it's going to take whatever HTML got pulled into response, and it's going to push that HTML right into here. So hopefully that is enough information for you. You can get started and get out to those practice problems now. Good luck, and we will see you next time.